Thank you. My name is John Shaw. I'm the director of the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute, and we're really delighted tonight to be joined by a really interesting and wide-ranging thinker and diplomat, Ron McMullen, who is a former career diplomat in the United States and is currently a professor at the University of Iowa. Before I introduce Ron, I wanted to shout out his wife, Jane, who is sitting here next to my wife, Mindy. Mindy and I had actually met Jane and Ron this summer in Iowa City, where they are living, and they showed us their beautiful community and gave us a tour of the state capitol, old state capitol, and got a little primer on Iowa history that was quite interesting. My dad was from Iowa, so I was particularly interested in learning about the developments in Iowa. Let me tell you a little bit about Ron, and then we're going to bring him on stage. He was born in Cedar Falls, Iowa, and grew up in a town called Northwood, which is a community of about 2,000 folks. He has an undergraduate degree from Drake University, a master's from the University of Minnesota, and a doctorate in political science from the University of Iowa. He entered the U.S. Foreign Service in 1982 and served for more than 30 years as a U.S. diplomat. He and Jane lived in and traveled in more than 100 countries. His postings have included the Dominican Republic, Sri Lanka, Gabon, South Africa, Fiji, Burma, Eritrea, where he served as an ambassador from 2007 to 2010. His profile at the University of Iowa's political science department captures some of the richness of his career. And I'm going to read just 2 sentences. It said, while posted in Fiji, he helped prevent civil conflict after an armed takeover of parliament. He was shot at during a riot in Sri Lanka and helped train mongooses to detect heroin. He survived a voodoo curse in the Dominican Republic and took Hillary Clinton on a tour of South Africa's Robben Island with Nelson Mandela. That gives you a good sense of just kind of the sweep of his career, and we will hear some of the flavor with that in his talk. In addition to this great career in diplomacy, Ron has also had a really stellar career in academics. He taught at West Point, the University of Texas at Austin, and has been at the University of Iowa for some time, since 2012. He teaches a variety of courses on comparative politics, diplomacy, and international relations, and he was telling me he likes to kind of to take some interesting tangents or interesting byways, and is teaching a class now called Outliers, which is a course on unusual countries, quirky countries. So maybe we can get him to tell a few of his stories of some of his favorite outlier countries. He's teaching a class this coming spring on statecraft diplomacy in the world, and he sent me his syllabus, and it looks like I wish I could take the class. But some of the topics that he will be taking his students through include one class will be on power, sports, politics, and diplomacy. Another class will be on sex and diplomacy. I'm guessing that will be well attended by his students. There's a course on, or a class session on international experiences and careers. Another session will be on polar politics, looking at the Arctic. There's going to be a session on negotiating an end to the Ukraine war, which is going to have student presentations, which would be really, I'm sure, quite interesting. And then he also has a section on black swans and catastrophes. So seems like a really intriguing class, and I'm sure that all of the classes he teaches are exceptional. One of the things I like to do when I invite academics to give talks, I like to take a look at their rate the professor comments, realizing that student perceptions are not always 100% fair, but sometimes give a sense of just what kind of professor it is. And the word describing Ron quite often is awesome. I'm going to read one reviewer said, awesome teacher, great lecture, makes material engaging, holds students to a very high standard, and has an amazing experiences in the fields that he teaches in. Another reviewer said, and I love this review, I absolutely loved his class. McMullen is super knowledgeable, and I learned a lot. His class was pretty difficult, but once you understand what he expects, you get into the swing of things. He does cold calls, so be sure to do your readings. heavy emphasis on participation. That was my downfall. I don't know if Ron gave some extra credit for kind of having self-awareness for these students, but again, all the comments of his students are just complete raving, talking about his ability to blend, the academic world and also this really storied career in diplomacy. So Ron, please come forward and welcome to SIU and the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute.
Thank you. That was very nice. Thank you, Director Shaw. Great to see everybody here. I enjoyed visiting with some of you during the reception earlier on this beautiful, beautiful evening here in Carbondale. The fact that you're going to give up an hour to be in the library, I'm really impressed with your curiosity and your support for the Paul Simon Public Institute. Now, when Senator Paul Simon was in Washington, D.C., we were living in a bipolar cold world for most of his political life. And everything the United States did internationally was a factor of this bipolar Cold War era, when we had the United States leading what we like to refer to as the free world, and the Soviets leading the communist part of the world. So a bipolar world. Everything, every decision that we took, it was, how will this affect our standing or our relationship with the Soviet Union? We also, as Senator Simon would say, politics stops at the water's edge. Now, today that seems really sort of obsolete. Politics doesn't stop at the water's edge. But it did then, because we were in a bipolar Cold War era. We refer to the era as the Cold War, but it really was hot in Korea, in Southeast Asia, in Southern Africa, in Central America, in the Horn of Africa. But there was no great power war during this 45 years of the bipolar world system. We came very, very, very close on a nice day in October of 1962. We had discovered that the Soviet Union was putting missiles into Cuba. President Kennedy imposed a blockade, and tensions were really high. It wasn't a blockade, it was a quarantine. A blockade is an act of war, so President Kennedy decided to call it a quarantine, where we would stop and inspect every Soviet vessel going to Cuba to make sure there weren't nuclear warheads or ballistic missiles on it. During that 13 days of the Cuban Missile Crisis, there was a submarine, a Soviet submarine, lurking off the coast of Cuba. And at one point, the U.S. Navy that was on the surface discovered that there was a Soviet sub there. The Soviet sub dove nearly to the Caribbean floor and went nearly silent. And they lost radio communications with Moscow. And they were so deep, so long, that they had to reduce the oxygen level in the atmosphere in the submarine, which can affect cognitive behavior. So here was this Soviet sub out of communication with Moscow, nuclear armed, running out of oxygen, and the U.S. Navy then began to drop depth charges to try to get this sub to surface. Now, in Soviet naval doctrine, if there were 3 flag rank officers on a ship, they had to be unanimous to launch a nuclear weapon without Moscow's approval. So we had the captain of the submarine, we had the communist political officer there, and we had a guy named Vasily Arkhipov, who was the flotilla commander. So we had 3 senior officers. They had to unanimously agree to launch a nuclear missile or a nuclear torpedo that would hit the USS Roosevelt and cause a tsunami. Besides sinking an aircraft carrier, it would cause a tsunami to sink all the other Navy ships in the area, leading probably to U.S. nuclear response to that nuclear attack on our fleet. So the captain of the submarine voted to launch. The political officer voted to launch. Vasily Arkhipov said no. So he saved the world. Imagine if that Soviet submarine had launched a nuclear weapon and the United States had retaliated, and the Soviet Union retaliated, we would not be here today. So we can say that Vasily Arkhipov is the man who saved the world. So the Cold War, thank goodness there was no major confrontation between major powers during this 40 years. So we came really close during the Cuban Missile Crisis, but thanks to Vasily Arkhipov, we managed to escape. Now, let's see here. What did I do? I left my advancer over here, sorry. So, Cold War, for about 4 decades, bipolarity. And then on Christmas Day of 1991, Gorbachev dissolved the Soviet Union. Stroke of his pen, nobody saw it coming. Director Shaw was in Washington as a young correspondent. I was teaching at West Point. The State Department had lent me to the Defense Department for 3 years. I was at West Point. And suddenly, the last almost half century of international relations and America's foreign policy foundations evaporated overnight when Gorbachev dissolved the Soviet Union into 15 independent countries. So I'm really bad in math. I would have been a geologist, I think, if I had been better in math, but I realized I couldn't do hard science, the math required for hard science, so I had to become a diplomat. I was a political science major and went on to be a diplomat. But for the last 30 years, people have been working to find an answer to this very, very simple equation. If you have a bipolar Cold War era and one pole goes away, how do you describe the system? Right? Pretty basic. 2 minus 1 equals what? And a bright guy named Francis Fukuyama, who had been at the State Department policy planning staff, I think he's a professor, went on to be a professor at Stanford, really bright guy. He said 2 minus 1 equals 1. He said conflict during the Cold War and conflict in the 1900s was about ideology. Liberal democracy beat fascism in World War II. Liberal democracy beat communism with the fall of the Soviet Union, the fall of Yugoslavia, etc. So liberal democracy and free markets have won. And so if history is about what is the ultimate good of society, then we're at the end of history. He wrote a book called The End of History, which alienated every historian. But it was that now we can all aspire to live in societies that have market economics, that have free enterprise, and are liberal democracies. And so for about a decade, from maybe 91 to 2001, from Christmas Day of 91 until September 11th of 2001, people talk about the unipolar decade, and that the United States basically was the hegemon, set the rules of the game, enforced the rules, maybe paid for maintaining the structure, the system, but also benefited from it. Not everybody agreed with Francis Fukuyama. There was a kind of a curmudgeonly old guy who was teaching at Harvard named Sam Huntington. And he said, no, just because we're no longer going to be fighting about ideology, he said it won't be the end of conflict. He said for thousands of years, people have fought on the basis of civilizations, largely based on values and religion. And so civilization is going to be the next reason for conflict. And he wrote a fairly provocative article in response to Francis Fukuyama called The Clash of Civilizations. And so in his article, he laid out about 8 civilizations that will be the basis of conflict in coming years. Well, clearly we were in the midst of the unipolar decade. Nobody paid attention to Francis Fukuyama or to Sam Huntington. Put that his book and the Foreign Affairs journal that he had written this article in, put it on a top shelf and just forgot it until September 11, 2001. Now, some of you here are old enough to remember where you were. It's kind of a generational shared memory for people my age. I talked to my students about 2001. Most of them weren't born in 2001. But on September 11, 2001, we were attacked by Al-Qaeda in the bloodiest attack on the American homeland in the history of America. So suddenly people got out Sam Huntington's argument and thought hard about, does Al-Qaeda hate us based on civilization, a difference of values, religion, our culture? And so during the global war on terror that America launched, it was basically a Sam Huntington view of how the world operates. And so Fukuyama said 2 minus 1 is 1. Maybe for a decade that was right. Huntington said 2 minus 1 might be 7 or 8. And during the global war on terror that we were launching around the world, in Afghanistan and Iraq and many other places, it seemed like maybe Huntington had the math right, that 2 minus 1 equals 8. So when President Obama was elected, he wanted to get out of the Middle East. He saw China as the primary competitor or enemy of the United States in the future and wanted to pivot towards Asia. He had spent time as a kid living in Indonesia. He understood Asia. He saw China as America's competitor, potential enemy. And so if you were to ask somebody during the Obama administration, 2 minus 1 equals what? They would say China is a rising power. When Xi Jinping became the Secretary General of the Chinese Communist Party in 2012, he began a sort of overt competition with the United States for influence and power in not just in Asia, but around the world. So during Obama, Trump 1, and Biden, a lot of people in Washington, if you asked them 2 minus 1 equals what, would have said 2. And now, in the Trump administration, President Trump has determined that sustaining the international system that largely promoted American rules and values that grew out of the rubble of World War II, the Bretton Woods economic system, the UN, etc., the series of international organizations that the United States helped establish and has benefited from the establishment of this set of global rules. President Trump has said, we have been played the sucker too long. We are no longer going to expend effort and money to maintain this system that has impoverished Peoria and other places where foreigners have taken advantage of us. So we are not going to sustain and support this system as it has previously been in place. And so people are looking around now and saying, who is going to do this? So there are people now in Washington and Brussels and elsewhere who are saying that the answer to 2 minus 1 equals what is 2 minus 1 maybe equals 0. We may be fragmenting into protectionist economics. International organizations are being hamstrung. The United States has basically killed the WTO. We're pulling out of UNESCO and the World Health Organization, no longer willing to maintain the support that we have for many international norms and institutions. So I want to just start with this basic formula. 2 minus 1 equals what? Political scientists are really bad at math, and we're still working on coming up with the right answer to that. So part of how we might go about thinking of answering this is to think for a minute about power. So we talked about a bipolar system. What's the distribution of power in the world? During the Cold War, it was a bipolar system. Some people are saying we were in a unipolar system during the decade after that. And so if you think about power is the ability to get others to do what you want them to. You say, oh, she's a very powerful woman. Maybe she heads a big corporation and can hire and fire and invest and make all kinds of. She can make people do what she wants because of her position at the head of a corporation. So individuals can be powerful. Corporations, countries. So the term power can apply to a country. It also can apply to almost anything else. So And so power is related in part to my former career as a diplomat. Colin Powell, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and my former boss as Secretary of State, said diplomacy is persuasion in the shadow of power. Without power, it's just naked pleading. So I think back during when we lived in Fiji, there was an attempted coup d'etat that ended up being sort of hamstrung. A group of special forces commandos took over Fiji's parliament and held all the members of parliament hostage for 57 days. We lived about 800 yards from the parliament building. Jane and our sons were sent home, and it looked like Fiji was going to teeter on the brink of a racial civil war. And one night, the duty officer called me and said, we've just heard an American diplomat has been taken hostage at Parliament. So I ran over there, and there were men at the gates of Parliament with automatic weapons and balaclavas on, and I didn't see an American diplomat, an American journalist, and a friend of mine from the New Zealand embassy, or New Zealand High Commission, came over. His name was Nick. And I said, Nick, I understand an American journalist has just been taken hostage. I said, do you happen to know any of the hostage takers? He said, Joe Nata is their spokesman. He was at my house for dinner about a month ago. I said, you happen to have his number? He said, yeah. And he dialed it on his cell phone, handed it to me. The guy answered. I said, is this Joe Nata? He said, yep. I said, this is Ron McMullen from the American Embassy. I understand you have an American journalist hostage there. He said, yep, he just came in to interview us, and we've taken him hostage. I said, listen, Joe, we don't have a dog in this fight. We haven't said anything about the attempted coup. We haven't made any move. I said, but unless that journalist comes out of the front gates of Parliament in 20 minutes unharmed and with his passport, all hell is going to rain down on your head. And I hung up. 20 minutes later, this young American journalist walks out of the Parliament. I run up to him and said, are you okay? He said, yep. I said, do you have your passport? He said, yep. I said, well, go home and look for a domestic assignment, because clearly you don't have enough brains to be a foreign correspondent. Get yourself into the heap of trouble. So I think of, and this was a total bluff. We had nothing, right? So if he hadn't walked out, I had no plan B. It was a complete bluff. But because I was an American diplomat, persuasion in the shadow of power made me more effective. So I think of, we also covered the little country from Fiji called the Republic of Tuvalu, and had a diplomat from Tuvalu who was maybe smarter than me, better in languages, just a better diplomat in every respect, had tried to pull off this bluff. Maybe she couldn't have done it because Tuvalu doesn't have power, the same power that the United States is. So Colin Powell arguing that diplomacy is persuasion in the shadow of power, I think made my job much easier to persuade people to do what we wanted them to do because of the power that the United States has had. So we think about power. Power comes in two varieties. One is called hard power. And hard power can be coercion, where you force somebody to do something, or it can be inducement. You can offer sticks or carrots to get somebody to do something. So here we have some executive telling an employee they're fired, somebody else offering money to get somebody to do what they want them to do. So we think about hard, and we think more of hard power. Maybe we bombed Iran in June because we wanted them to stop developing nuclear weapons, right? So that was a coercive kind of hard power. We can also use inducement. We'll lower the tariff barriers on you if you invest in America. So hard power can be carrots or sticks, punishment or rewards. Another kind of power is called soft power. Joseph Nye from Harvard came up with this notion, which you can get people to do what you want them to do because they like you. Right? It's the power of attraction. For they like your behavior, they like your values, they like what you stand for. So imagine if if the county supervisors wanted garbage litter picked up on Highway 13 between here and Murfreesboro. Is that the town over there? Yeah. You could use coercion. You could say, all right, you drunken drivers, you have 15 hours of community service. If you don't do your community service, it's off to jail for you. And your community service is going to be picking up litter along Route 13 between here and Murfreesboro. That's coercion. The state can force people to do something using hard power coercion. Or they could say to students at SIU, we will pay you $25 an hour on Saturday, 10 hours guaranteed to pick up litter. Would you do this for $25 an hour? Yeah? Students, would you? Yeah. So you could pay somebody to do what you wanted them to do. So those are forms of hard power. What if you heard that Sabrina Carpenter was going to be in town? Now, many of you don't know who Sabrina Carpenter is, but she is the top of the charts right now. She's had 3 of her songs were in the top 5 songs on Spotify, rivaling the Beatles' monopoly on the top of the chart. So if you don't know who Sabrina Carpenter is, you're out of it. I didn't. I had to look her up. I read about her in The Economist a couple of weeks ago. Anyway, so if Sabrina Carpenter was here and said, I'm going to pick up litter between here and who would like to come out and help me, and maybe we can get together for a celebration of, clean up the world afterwards. How many students at SIU would show up? Well, all of them, right? Because they're attracted to her celebrity, they like her style, they think her lyrics are funny. So that's the power of attraction. And just up the river, we drove through Hannibal today. The classic American exemplar of soft power is Tom Sawyer. Aunt Polly says, I want you to paint this fence. Tom says, I can't, I'm going fishing. Aunt Polly says, you're going to paint the fence. He sees his friend Jim. He says, Jim, you should paint the fence. I'm going to go fishing. And Jim says, no, it's not my job. It's your job. So Tom is grumpy. He's out there painting his fence. He would rather be going fishing when his friend Billy comes by. And Tom suddenly smiles and starts to whistle while he's painting his fence. Billy says, hey, you want to go fishing? And he says, no, why would I want to go fishing when I could paint this fence? Right? So Billy stops and looks at it and says, yeah, that's kind of fun. Can I have a turn? Tom said, no. Why would I let you do this unless, wait a minute, that apple looks pretty good. Would you give me your apple? So Billy gives him his apple. Pretty soon other boys from the neighborhood come through, watch Tom and Billy smiling and whistling, having a great time painting this fence. And pretty soon they give him a marble or a fishing hook or a special, something. And by the end of the day, Tom has this pile of treasure and the fence is painted. Not because he forced anybody to do it or paid anybody to do it, because he made it look fun. The power of attraction. I happened to serve in South Africa when Nelson Mandela was president. 1994, 800,000 Rwandans chopped up their neighbors with machetes. And the United States sat on its hands. One of the worst genocides since the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. We did nothing. We were feeling kind of guilty about that post facto, and so Warren Christopher, the Secretary of State, said we need to set up what's called the African Crisis Response Initiatives, sort of a 911 of prepared emergency responders who, if there's a natural or man-made catastrophe anywhere in Africa, they can call the African 911, and capable countries with trained responders can take care of it before it turns into a genocide. President Mandela knew this, didn't want to get involved. He was trying to transform the South African military. During the apartheid period, almost all the officers were white, and the enlisted personnel were black, colored, Asian, and white. So he wanted to have a South Africa military that looked more like the country, which meant removing a lot of white officers, which could have led to all kinds of blowback. So he did not want to take on an additional responsibility for the military of South Africa. We knew this. We told the secretary, don't come. Warren Christopher, a trial lawyer, thought he could convince Mandela to do this. He said, no, don't come. He's dead set against it. You know, it could be ugly. So Warren Christopher came anyway. I was in Cape Town when this meeting was happening. I was supposed to be the site officer at Tain-Hayes, President Mandela's Cape Town office. I was supposed to make sure that there was a parking place for the American Secretary of State's vehicle. Security was there, and to let people know when everything was ready so Warren Christopher could come. So I was there, wasn't going to go into the meeting, just the site officer. The car pulls up. They jump out and they said, the note taker missed the ride. He overslept. He's not here. Do you have a notebook? I said, yeah. He said, come in. You're taking notes. So he walked into President Mandela's office, and he is there greeting each of us as we come in the door. Hi, I'm Nelson Mandela. As if we wouldn't know who he was. You know, one of the most famous people in the world. And there was a long table for the negotiations. But first there were kind of snacks, and he came around and talked to each of us. He said, what's your name? I said, Ron McMullen. He said, where are you from? I said, Iowa. He said, tell me about Iowa. I said, well, it's right next to Illinois, and you know, it's got good people and good soil, and you know, we chatted. And he said, oh, I understand you're at the Consulate General here, and how do you like serving in Cape Town? I said, oh, it's the most beautiful city in the world. And he came and talked to each of the Americans there on a personal basis. And they had scheduled this meeting so it was just before the secretary needed to fly on to Dar es Salaam to try to get Tanzania to sign up for this event, the ACRI. And so they knew that there was only about a 30-minute window for the negotiation, and Mandela had just run down the clock. We were clearly only about 15 minutes left. Warren Christopher began to move towards the table. President Mandela saw this and said, oh, I forgot, we have cookies. And he personally went to sort of a buffet thing, grabbed a plate of cookies, and came up and said, would you like a cookie? And so, wow, Nelson Mandela just served me a cookie. We finally got to the negotiating table, and Warren Christopher was so flustered, he knew there was only about 5 minutes left. He gave a really incomplete, unpersuasive pitch. And President Mandela never said no. He never said anything negative. He said, Mr. Secretary, I'd like you to thank you for explaining this very complex, very important issue to me. He said, it's so complex and so important. I'm going to have to discuss this at length with my entire cabinet. But I'd like to thank you for coming. Would you like to step out to the stairs for a photo opportunity? And suddenly, Warren Christopher realized that Nelson Mandela had outfoxed him, that he had run out the clock on him. He had to leave to get to the airport to go on to Dar es Salaam. Never said a negative word. All of the Americans were just smiling. Here's a young diplomat there who just couldn't believe that Nelson Mandela had just served him a cookie. And you couldn't see, but Warren Christopher had steam coming out of his ears here. He was just so mad. But all the other Americans on the delegation thought most high. So nobody could have done this but Nelson Mandela. He had this attractiveness, this soft power, this statesman-like character that allowed him to basically say no to the most powerful country in the world, to say, no, I'm not going to do what you want me to, but doing it so nicely that he won friends and influenced people by the way he did it. So that's my sort of the ultimate in the exercise of soft power. So Jane and I teach many summers in Kosovo. Iowa has a special relationship with Kosovo, a little country in the former Soviet Union.
No, former Yugoslavia.
Yes, sorry, thank you, Jane. Former Yugoslavia. We have a Consulate General of Kosovo in Des Moines, and our National Guard has been part of the Kosovo force, the peacekeepers there. The law school sends an extern to work in the foreign ministry frequently. And so Americans are the most popular foreigner in Kosovo. They love America. And Iowans are the best kind of American. So I wear my Iowa hat, and even taxi drivers say, oh, Iowa, good for Iowa. And so we were in downtown. The downtown of Pristina, the capital, is kind of like a pedestrian area. And Jane and I were down a couple of years ago, and we were going to buy an ice cream cone. And there was a little stand that had various kinds of ice cream. Jane couldn't make up her mind. A lady came up and said, I heard you speak in English. Are you British or American? I said, oh, we're American. She said, oh, can I buy your ice cream for you? And I said, no, that's all right, thanks. We've got it covered. She said, no, I really want to buy your ice cream. for you. And I said, why? She said, America saved my life, and I'm forever grateful. So 1999, Yugoslavia and Serb militia were on the verge of committing genocide against the largely Muslim population of Kosovo. The United States intervened. Bill Clinton decided to intervene. NATO fought a 78-day war against Yugoslavia. We bombed Belgrade and eventually forced the Serbs to allow Kosovo to live free. Several years later, 2008, Kosovo declared its independence. So this woman, in terms of soft power, Bill Clinton's war against Yugoslavia convinced her that our actions and our values, stopping genocide and supporting human rights in Kosovo, were so worthy that she was going to buy our ice cream for us. And finally we let her. It was most often when people find you're American, they would rather throw ice cream at you than buy it, particularly nowadays. So in Kosovo, most government buildings have 5 flags. That's the flag of Kosovo. Many of the Kosovars were ethnically cleansed, had to flee to neighboring Albania. So Albania, their kind of sister country there. The United States flag for saving them, the European Union flag, aspirational, and NATO flag, also aspirational. So Kosovo really likes America. They find America attractive because of our values. So how many places do you see it overseas? Do you see a statue of Bill Clinton and Bill Clinton Boulevard? That church in the background is Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa lived in Kosovo for most of her teenage years. There's also a Bob Dole street near here. He was in the Senate and helped save Kosovo. So our soft power recently has declined. People do not find America as attractive as they used to. So the Pew Foundation does a global research survey, and from 2024 to 2025, you can see, so for example, in Sweden, in 2024, most Swedes had a favorable impression of America. Now 79% have an unfavorable impression of America. So we're doing something that is diminishing our power, our soft power, and it's across the board. Only in about slightly less than half of all countries in the world now do most people have a favorable view of the United States. I always thought as an American diplomat that we were the good guys, that we were here to promote American values, to help to promote American interest as well, but we have gotten away from promoting American values, and we have done, so I'm not here to talk about domestic politics. I understand former Senator Kara Mosley Braun will be here in 2 months or a month and a half. You can ask her about how these things work out on domestic politics. So I'm going to talk about 4 U.S. values here. Democracy. Democracy, some people feel, is seen some regression in the United States, but we used to promote democracy overseas. America was founded on the notion, not on blood or soil, but on an idea that people should rule themselves. It was radical, it was revolutionary in 1776. We were still one of the only countries that was formed based on an ideology of self-governance. So we think we're better off because we're a democracy. We think you would be better off if you were a democracy. And we would be better off if you were a democracy as well because of the theory of democratic peace. Democratic countries don't fight each other. So a way to end interstate war is to promote democracy, right? If every country was democracy and the notion of democratic peace holds, it would be the end of international war. There still might be civil wars and other things, but it could be the end. When we were in Rangoon, Burma, we supported the National League for Democracy that was under threat under great pressure from a military junta that had taken over the government. And Jane taught English to National League for Democracy Youth Wing students. They couldn't go to university, but Jane helped teach them English. We did all sorts of things to support the leader of the National League for Democracy, Aung San Suu Kyi, a Nobel Peace Laureate. At one time, she had won a Free Spirit Award given by the founder of USA Today magazine. And he came over and said, Al Newharth was his name, said, if I come over to give Aung San Suu Kyi this Free Spirit Award, will I be able to get in to see her? I said, yeah, I think so. So we went, and he said, you've received, or you're going to receive the Free Spirit Award this year. There's usually a big gala in Washington. Because you're under house arrest, you won't be able to go. But it also comes with $1 million prize if you're interested. And I said to her, I said, can I talk to you for a minute? So we went into her piano room, and I said, if you want this prize, if you want it in a big box of money, or if you want it given to your sons in Europe, or if you want us to hold it for you, whatever you want to do to keep the leader of the National League for Democracy and the party going, I'll do anything you want with this $1 million. And she said, okay. Went back, she said, thank you, Mr. Newharth, I accept the prize. Ron has my banking particulars. Whatever he says to do with $1 million, do it. So we went out on a limb. We tried to do things to help support the embers of democracy in places like Burma, also known as Myanmar. Officially, we still call it Burma. So we supported democracy strongly, and sometimes at some danger to ourselves, overseas. So another thing is human rights. As a political officer, one of my jobs every place was to write an annual human rights report. It was sort of the gold standard of the human rights situation in every country in the world. It's now being cut way back and being edited for content in the State Department before it's released publicly. But we did, so when I was ambassador in Eritrea is sometimes called the North Korea of Africa. Very heavily censored. There's no freedom of the press. And so one of our most popular outreach activities, we had an American center with a little American library. And in it we had 10 computer terminals. And they were uncensored. So a college-age student could come in and sit at a computer terminal and read about world events, world news, apply to Southern Illinois University, do whatever they wanted to do, uncensored. And there was always a waiting list, a line to get into to have free access to information. One of our communicators, a guy who worked in our telecommunications system, put up a $35 antenna and rebroadcast NPR. Illegally, it was illegal to do in Asmara, but anybody with an FM radio who lived in the capital city could tune in and listen to NPR. I mean, the government probably knew what we were doing. They never called us on it. But again, that was an initiative to bring freedom of the press, free expression to people who were living in sort of an open-air prison in Eritrea. So we promote human rights, writing the Human Rights Report, doing things to bring freedom of speech, freedom of press, free access to media to people around the world. Rule of law. I've worked a lot on counter-narcotics, and Director Shaw mentioned training mongooses to detect heroin. When we were in Sri Lanka, there was a civil war. The Tamil Tigers were trying to break off the Tamil parts of north and east of Sri Lanka. They were buying weapons from Southeast Asia from the Vietnam War era by importing sort of semi-refined heroin from Pakistan, refining it, and then trading it to Southeast Asia arms dealers for surplus Vietnam War weapons. So we thought, what can we do to break this chain of illegal drug imports? I asked the director of the Sri Lankan Narcotics Police, do you have a canine corps? And they said, well, the Europeans gave us 6 Belgian shepherds, but they really don't do well in the heat in the tropics here. So we have to keep them up in the central mountains. They're pretty expensive. When we have a tip that there might be drugs coming into the port, we have to bring them down in an air-conditioned van. And 7% of the population is Muslim. They think of dogs as not clean animals, don't want dogs going through their luggage or their cargo. And he said, just as offhand remark, said, it's too bad we can't train mongooses to detect heroin, because Sri Lankans have long had mongooses kind of as semi-tamed snake killers in their yards and their gardens. And I said, well, how do you know we can't? And so I said, I think I can get some money from Washington for us to train mongooses to see if we can detect heroin. And the guy said, well, we have some heroin, we can use that, and we can use the National Zoo. We found a PhD zoologist from the University of Maryland who was a Sri Lankan American who volunteered to do, or we paid to do the training. So we got $50,000 from the State Department to do it. This guy selected, russet mongooses and silver mongooses and other kinds of mongooses to see which kind were best. We had heroin that we could train them with. And the idea was a shipping container comes into the port full of machine parts. You could release a brace of mongooses in the shipping container. They could scurry around, find the satchel of heroin at the back of the shipping container, and come out with their tails all bushy. Or they could, I also imagine them running like on a treadmill at the airport on the luggage thing here, running up over suitcases. So my last day or last week in Sri Lanka, the British Narcotics Police came down and gave the mongooses their final exams, which they passed with flying colors. But then two things. So the Washington Post wrote an article called Rin Tin Tin versus Rikki Tikki Tavi in Sri Lanka, and showing how this was a culturally appropriate way to fight narcotics and help defeat this scourge of smuggled heroin. And so in terms of rule of law, this worked, but right after that, two things happened. One, I left, and a group of radical Maoist militant Buddhists, they went by the JVP, rose up against the government and killed about 50,000 people, overran the zoo. Our mongooses were killed or released. The Sri Lankan zoologist disappeared. We never knew what happened to him. So any young people here, if you want to make your fortune, you can do it by training mongooses to detect heroin. It's a proven winner, but it's never been implemented. So that was one way that I worked to help promote the rule of law with a country that we worked with. Another value that we promote was free enterprise. When we were in Cape Town, has anybody been to South Africa? Yeah, okay. Cape Town has one of the world's unique floral kingdoms. It's called fynbos. They've got plants unlike any place else in the world, and they tried, when I was there, they were trying to get a flower export business underway. But they didn't really know how to do it very well. Now you can buy big king proteas in Whole Food and other fancy places. But then they didn't really have it together. So what would happen, they'd send a big shipment, a whole plane full of very short-lived flowers from this unique floral kingdom to Miami and to be sold in American floral shops. And what happened is APHIS, the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service at the airport, would take a big table, put a sheet on it, go in and grab a bouquet of flowers, come out and just whap it on this table until all of the flowers and leaves were just disintegrated. And then they would watch for 20 minutes. If anything moved on that sheet on the table, then they would say, burn it all. And all the flowers would have to be incinerated right there. So we helped the flower exporters in the Cape Town area to have a co-op to fumigate flowers to kill all of the insects that we didn't want coming into the U.S. So mostly when we think about free enterprise, we tried to promote American exports, but also in this particular unique case, we worked closely to help South African sort of flower exporters be able to have the fruits of free enterprise and global trade. So the United States has been in the past, been doing things that promote American values that people respected. Human rights, democracy, rule of law, free enterprise. We no longer really are doing those things overseas. You might say, well, we're not doing them so well in the United States either. I'm not going to get into that. But it's not something that American diplomats are called to do today. And you saw in the favorability or unfavorability ratings of the United States how that has weakened us, has robbed us of an element of our national power. And so American diplomats seeking to promote American interests and values, if diplomacy is persuasion in the shadow of power, our diplomats are much less persuasive now because we are purposely reducing an element of our power, soft power, the power of attraction, in the way that we're interacting with many countries around the world. So you can keep those domestic political questions for a later speaker, but I'd love to hear a question or comment from you about anything I've raised or anything else. Questions? Yes, sir.
What's your feeling on what's been done with the USAID?
Yeah, I was a State Department intern for 3 months in Khartoum, Sudan when I was 23, and then worked for USAID for 3 months. There's no correlation between foreign aid and development. So if you look at how much aid, so if you take all the countries in the world, how much aid have they gotten? So my friends in USAID thought they were doing development. They really aren't. What they do two things really well. One is disaster assistance. If in 2005 there was a huge tsunami in the Indian Ocean that hit Indonesia and lots of other countries, the U.S. came in and provided disaster assistance that saved tens of thousands of lives, earned America a great deal of goodwill, and really ended the secessionist war in Aceh in Sumatra, where this tsunami most difficultly hit. So USAID do really good in, well, I say health and disaster relief, not very good in development. So aid was hard pressed to show that they could do development. And foreign aid, if you ask people in downtown Carbondale, before President Trump was president, what percentage of our tax dollars went to foreign aid? The number was going to be really, really high compared to the reality. So the United States won a lot of goodwill, increased our soft power because people saw us doing health programs around the world with HIV, AIDS, and tuberculosis and other things, malaria. That's all, or mostly stopped now, and our ability to do disaster relief has been greatly diminished. So again, we were saving lives and helping people, but also we were building our soft power. So again, it's an example of the United States removing one of the elements of governance that has built soft power for our country and helped save many lives around the world. So I'm against it. Other questions, comments, observations?
Can you talk a little bit about, in Africa and elsewhere, Africa seems to just not be in our national picture at all. And can you talk about how that feels from their perspective this way?
Yeah, so the good side and the bad side. When I was ambassador to Eritrea, I could do anything I want. Washington really didn't care. Eritrea could have broken off and slid into the Red Sea and they wouldn't have noticed. So whatever I said basically went. So that made my ambassadorship more autonomous, I guess. Ambassador Huckabee in Jerusalem right now, I mean, he can't scratch his left ear without permission from Washington. It's just, and sometimes he does and gets in trouble. So being in a country that doesn't matter, to try to get any attention in Washington or any consideration is really hard. So I just read in Foreign Affairs magazine, democracy is almost extinguished in the country of Tunisia that started the Arab Spring and was one of the first successful democracies to come out of the Arab Spring. Now democracy has been retrenched so far that it's really an autocracy. And the author was saying, oh, America really should ramp up its pro-democracy. Where have they been? America doesn't do that anymore. We're not going to sanction people for backsliding on democracy in a little country like Tunisia that doesn't have any oil or rare earth minerals or anything. So if we're a transactional country now, if our foreign affairs priorities are transactional, what can you do for me? Many economies in Africa don't have the wherewithal to be a transactional partner for our former reality TV president. So it's hard to make the case. And a little country like Fiji, I mean, as well. So if you're Denmark and have Greenland, so our threats to the Danish prime minister really haven't worked out well yet. Transactionalism makes it hard for countries that don't have something that the United States wants or needs, or that our president doesn't want or need, to get attention and to get consideration. So, yeah, it's really hard. Yes, ma'am.
In following on your comment to Nathan, I have the perception over the last 40 years or so that you would have been in some of these numerous countries. And in looking at, say, what SIU used to serve versus what currently serves in the education realm that feeds into development, in the 60s and 70s and even into the 80s, SIU served in teaching many graduate students and other students from Africa and South Asia. And then that shifted over to Asia. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, I can remember doing baseline health surveys for a national park project in Madagascar in the late 80s and early 90s during what you describe as the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of Gorbachev and all that. So in that tipping point, maybe Africa has sort of disappeared in people's consciousness as being any kind of focal point, but earlier it was, when you had the concern that once people came off of the British and French colonial oversight of these different African nations, and then the concern that many of them were adopting socialist governments.
Yeah,
it was of concern back then.
They benefited from
whereas more recently,
Cold War competition.
Gone
if
out
we don't do something
line.
for them, the Soviets will get their vote in the UN and establish a Marxist government there. So you're absolutely right that Africa used to be more important when it was part of the Cold War chessboard, and not so much anymore.
I guess that comment just followed on Nathan's remark, but one of my concerns more recently in traveling with a friend who's lived quite a while in Central America and Guyana, and looking at interaction of USAID and NED and what have you in many countries with regime change. I can see how large corporations or our current administration is much more transactional in what they want and how they're trying to tip things in their favor. How do you think the current administration is going to proceed with Venezuela, Central America, and all that in light of their shunning everybody with any kind of immigrant status, whether they're protected immigrants who've come to our country because of our regime change, and then others who've come because of, as you described, the attraction that's been built up over the years?
President Trump has been surprisingly resilient. I mean, he did back off of tariffs for a while after Liberation Day. His tariffs have been deemed, most of his tariffs, his reciprocal tariffs have been deemed unconstitutional by a court and an appellate court. Within the next 30 days or 40 days, it's likely to go before the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court upholds the appellate court's judgment verdict, then all of those reciprocal tariffs will have to go away. So he may be rolled back by the Supreme Court, but maybe not. So one of the things that's a question for an American-focused political person or judicial person is, where's the backbone to stand up to what many people deem to be unconstitutional seizures of power in the Federal Reserve System, levying tariffs, sending National Guard troops to Chicago or whatever. So it's the courts have been one break on this and how it will affect our international relations. I think the main point will be tariffs. If the Supreme Court says no, in fact, those reciprocal tariffs are not constitutional. It has to be Congress that passes them, not the president. So that's what I think is going to be maybe the biggest indicator in the next month or so. Yeah. Yes, ma'am?
Yeah, so getting back to your original calculations or addition and subtraction, 2 minus 1 equals big question, lots of different answers. What do we have now? What's the equation? Because that one, that would be us left, are we?
I don't think that the United States right now is willing to do what it takes to uphold the system. And the system may be changing, and the system is fracturing into maybe spheres of influence or protectionist economic settings. Surprisingly, almost no countries have responded to President Trump's tariffs with counter tariffs, but they could. I think they're waiting to see what the Supreme Court says. So that might be the story. So right now, I think that 2 minus 1 equals 0. Who's going to step up and enforce the rules of the game to make this a global system work? Is it going to be China? Well, some people. China is the biggest trading partner for 120 different countries. So China has a lot of clout. They can block or allow trade, access to their markets, etc. So will China be so a lot of this, I think, will be determined by the race for AI. If China wins that, then maybe 2 minus 1 equals 1, and it's not us. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball, and we've been grappling with this equation for decades.
How is AI changing diplomacy for on-the-ground diplomats?
I've been out of the Foreign Service for over a decade now. One of the challenges is how to select. We have writing samples, and it's kind of how does it affect academia, because you can never be sure of what's been submitted was actually not written by ChatGPT. So it's the application process, the selection process has to take that into account as well. And so up to now, seeing has been believing. But what if you saw an AI-generated video clip of any ruler in the world saying anything? You can't believe it, because it could be AI-generated. So it has all kinds of implications for what is truth, who do you believe. I don't know how it's going to play out, but China surprised everybody with DeepSeek, very small investment in money and sort of computing powers, come up with what many people say is a highly adaptable system. Other people say that if you have 300,000 people maintaining the Great Firewall of China to censor the internet, how is AI going to function in a society like that? So I assign my students this year, this fall semester, on an assignment where they have to use AI, ChatGPT, to answer a question. And it would be interesting to ask them about Tiananmen Square, to ask ChatGPT, and then to ask DeepSeek, to see how those two prompts elicit perhaps very different answers. So I don't know. Boy, AI, it could be the best thing in the world, or it could be the worst thing in the world, or somewhere in between. And I really don't know, but it's coming at us really fast. So it will change diplomacy, it will change journalism, it will change academia. Good luck. Yeah?
Just to elaborate on this idea, when you ask, for example, ChatGPT, what is Taiwan? I mean, ChatGPT answers like Taiwan is a separate country. But when you ask DeepSeek, it says it's a part of China.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So play around with that when you go home tonight. Ask them ask him what, is he said, if you ask ChatGPT, this American AI, what is Taiwan? Says it's a separate island that, you ask the Chinese AI DeepSeek, says, oh, it's a part of China. So it gives a very politically correct answer for the Communist Party of China. So I challenge you to do that on other issues as well. Yes, sir.
In a sense, the same answer you'd have gotten from Chinese government people, American people who weren't diplomats, whereas the diplomats were trying to keep their answers very non-committal.
Well, we have we recognize the People's Republic of China as the legitimate government of China. Yeah.
Do you have a sense about whether or not soft power can be rebuilt once given away?
Oh, boy.
Or is it gone forever? Does a new administration, presumably in 2029, get back to where we used to be?
The Supreme Court could overturn the reciprocal tariffs next month. It will take much longer than that to rebuild our soft power. I mean, once burned or twice burned, thrice shy. I think it will be very, very difficult for America to rebuild the trust, the friendship, the respect for our values and our behavior that we had, say, during the Obama administration or during the Bush administration. That the current transactional interaction with the world, I think, has set us back for more than the next 3.5 years. I think it will be a longer lasting negative impact on our ability to accrue and utilize soft power. So yeah, I think it's really serious. It's not something we think about a lot, but if you look at Sweden, and 79% of Swedes have an unfavorable view of America, and we ask them to do something, why would a Swedish politician do something for a country that, 4 out of every 5 Swedes don't like? So yeah, I think it's going to be a big problem going. Yeah, so it's like interpersonal relations. If somebody lies to you or cheats you, you may be really forgiving, but that's not most of us. It takes a while to reestablish that trust and respect in a relationship, and we've really damaged it a lot in the last several months. Other? Yep. One here, and then. Oh, you've got the mic there? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned Denmark, the European Union, your comments on that with Greenland.
Yeah.
What are your comments?
Harry Truman tried to buy Greenland. We bought, during World War I, we bought the Danish Virgin Islands. So it has happened, but when Denmark said, no, Greenland is not ours to sell. There's home rule now in Greenland. President Trump was very put out with the Prime Minister of Denmark and was just kind of threw a fit, which again is not a way to influence friends or influence people. It's possible. So 3 weeks ago, the American ambassador was convoked to the foreign ministry because people associated with the administration were in Greenland, trying to foment action on the independence issue for Greenland. So if Greenland goes independent, there are only about 58,000 Greenlanders, and divide, say, $11 billion by 58,000 people, it's a really big number. So some people in the administration think that if we can get Greenland to separate, then we can induce them using hard power payment to become freely associated with the United States. So we also have a big space base in northern Greenland, which some Danes are saying, why are we still doing that? So it's an issue that's really damaged our relations not only with Denmark but the other Nordic countries. And it's ongoing and kind of underhanded now, which caused our ambassador in Copenhagen to be called in and read the Riot Act about people close to the administration trying to foment independence among Greenlanders. So yeah, it's not over, but Denmark is saying, we can't sell you Greenland, it's Greenland's decision. So if Greenland goes independent, then perhaps. But right now, because of Trump's pressure, the favorability for independence in Greenland has plummeted. Kind of like America's favorability in Sweden, you see that in Greenland as well. So I don't think it's going to happen during this Trump administration. We had another, you've had one earlier. Is there somebody else that hasn't? Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just going to, Buckminster Fuller talked about this.
We went past his house.
Talked about this concept of emergence through emergency. Do you think this is time to go to his idea of spaceship Earth and forget about national borders and start working together as crew members aboard a large spaceship that's traveling through the universe and work together to solve our problems so that all of us have a wonderful standard of living because we live in a paradise. This Earth is a paradise.
Yep.
The fact that we spend so much energy and resources destroying things rather than caring for each other, loving each other, and making this the paradise that we should all benefit from.
Yeah, I don't think there's ever going to be a world government, and the most we can do is to behave to people that we interact with as you've described. We can each individually make a difference in other people's lives. Is there going to be a world government that's pacifist and loving? No. Elon Musk thinks maybe Mars, we can do that in Mars, but so we can only do it individually, affect and influence people that we have contact with. So yeah, I'm not optimistic, but individual efforts still matter a lot. And I think we have time for one more.
Sure.
Would you like to have it?
The question is about like competition. So there was competition. There was security competition, overall like strategic competition between United States and Soviet Union during Cold War. And now we're entering a new bipolar world and new competition between China and the United States. So do you see any like differences and similarities between competition between the United States and Soviet Union and competition between between China and the United States?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a really good question. When we were in a Cold War with the Soviet Union, Soviet Union's economy Russia's economy today is about the size of Italy's. There was almost nothing that we imported from Russia or depended on Russia for. As I said, China is the leading trading partner with about 120 countries around the world, including one of the United States' 3 largest trading partners. So China has tried to draw, the United States accepts 15% of Chinese exports now, but China is really still one of our top 3 trading partners. So unlike the Soviet Union and the United States during the Cold War, there was no commercial connection really. If we get into a Cold War with China, China is vital to the world economy and to the American economy. So if we decoupled completely, it would be very disruptive to our economy and the world economy. So that's the big difference, is China's economic clout, which is huge compared to the puny, almost non-existent economic clout outside the Soviet Union that the Soviet Union had, particularly in the 1980s. So that makes it unlikely that we're going to see a return to a very clear-cut, decisive Cold War split like we saw on my first slide. So the economic interdependence between China and much of the world, I think, will obviate a Cold War like we had between the West and the Soviet Union. But you're seeing some of that now in Central Asia, right? Yeah. The interdependence between Russia and China and the 5 countries of Central Asia. So yeah, so you're probably thinking about this very issue for your dissertation, right? So good luck on that. Yeah.
Well, Ron, just thank you so much for just a wonderful talk. I think all of us feel like we were in good hands when you were representing us as a diplomat for 30 years, and we're probably all envious of students at the University of Iowa who get to listen to you. And well, maybe you could briefly tell us about your Outliers class. What quirky country should we be paying attention to?
Do countries' characteristics affect the outcomes in governance in terms of happiness or development or good governance? And in many little countries, it's like local politics. I grew up in a town of about 2,000, and the mayor, Bob Perry, was my high school social studies teacher and football coach. So I saw the mayor all the time. And in little countries like Sao Tome y Principe or Barbados, you're living, your neighbors, maybe you go to the same church, maybe you are a Rotary member with the Prime Minister or other senior government officials. So the level of personal interaction, the social capital that government authorities have, is really quite high and really remarkable, more like local government in the Midwest. So many countries that are really small have a surprisingly high degree of democracy, but don't do very well on economic development because they are so small. Imagine if Carbondale was its own country, right? It would be, one little anecdote. We covered Tuvalu from Fiji. Tuvalu is a little tiny country, joined the UN in 2002. Its upper internet domain title ends .tv. So in other countries, like if you're in the UK, your email ends .uk. So Tuvalu luckily got .tv. They rent their upper internet domain to, I think, GoDaddy for about $11 million a year. That's their main source of income besides selling tuna. So one day I was in Fiji, a Tuvaluan diplomat came over and said, do you know anything about the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi? Kind of an odd question. I said, well, yes, as a matter of fact, I do. He was the guru to the Beatles, and he happened to buy Parsons College in Fairfield, Iowa, where my grandmother went, and established the Maharishi International University now, where they teach transcendental meditation and people how to levitate. So I said, why do you ask? He said, well, we just got an offer from the Maharishi to buy one of our islands for $200 million, and we have to cede sovereignty over that. I said, why? What does the Maharishi want you to cede? He said he wants to form his own country called the Global Country of World Peace. And so to have a country, you need people, government, land, and sovereignty. So he had people that worked for him. He could form a government. If he had land, he could declare independence and get other countries to recognize him. So if you were a country, if Tuvalu had given the Maharishi, sold him an island, he could sell ambassadorships around the world. Would you like to be the Tuvaluan ambassador to Kazakhstan? America sells about a third of its ambassadorships, so it's a going concern. You could send an unexaminable diplomatic pouch between every embassy. You could print your own currency, you could have a stock market, you could have banking licenses, you could have corporate licenses, you could rent satellite parking spaces. That's when the Kingdom of Tonga rents a lot of satellite parking spaces for one of their big sources of income. So if you had your own country, like the Maharishi wanted, he could make a lot of money. He was going to have a university there. You could you could sell passports. You could instantly make millions of dollars, and he wanted his own country. So I said to the Tuvaluans, lease him an island for 99 years. Don't cede sovereignty, because you are one of the newest members of the international international community. We have about 195 countries in the world. Think if the Baptist Church had their own country, like the Catholics have their own country. What if John Deere in Peoria, or now Dallas, wanted their own country?
Or
Caterpillar, yeah. John Deere in Rock Island, I guess. If every corporation or religious group or criminal organization had its own country, and we had 2,000 countries, how would international relations be different? It would be impossible. I said, so be a good member and don't cede sovereignty over an island. So they didn't. He went on, the Maharishi tried to buy an island from the country of Kiribati. That didn't work either. So if you go to Fairfield, Iowa today, where the Maharishi International University is, there is a little, kind of north of Fairfield, there's a building. It's a very grand, with lots of gold paint on it and columns and a big fence around it. And it says the capital of the global country of world peace. So rather than get their own country in the Pacific, they had to settle for kind of a soybean field north of Fairfield, Iowa. They do issue their own currency. They have a currency called the ROM that they print, that if you go to Maharishi International University, you can pay some of your tuition in ROM. And some stores in Fairfield will take ROM as payment for some of their goods. So anyway, so we talk about what is sovereignty, how would the international system be different if there were 2,000 countries as opposed to just under 200. And so I've actually foiled not only the Maharishi, but another group as well. That's another story. But anyway, so we get into the character of the international system and use this little story about the Maharishi, Mahesh Yogi, trying to get his own country to think about how the system works and how it, it's kind of a delicate balance right now. And what's happening currently may very much disrupt that. So we hope there can be some balance retained or regained in the not too distant future. So anyway, thank you. You've been a great audience. Really enjoyed it. Thank you. Director Shaw.
Thanks, everyone.